Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Brian T. Jackett, joined by Cameron Parker, who's one of my teammates. And we're going to do another kind of round of introductions on some new APIs that are coming out there. If you were on a couple of weeks ago, we did some things on the eDiscovery Premium APIs. This time around, we're actually going to talk about some of the privacy APIs. This is all part of what we call the Security, Compliance, Identity, and Management, SCIM APIs. And these are going to be available to us actually in GA, in this case, on the V1 endpoint. So some great things that we'll be able to show up for you today. All right, let's jump into things. So today we've got a couple of different things that we'll be going over. We'll give you a quick little overview of the APIs themselves, some different use cases for this. Cameron's actually going to demo some of those different scenarios for you, so you can actually see what does this actually look like inside of Postman, but then also see the end results of this inside of our environments as well. Talk a little bit about some of the licensing/monetization impacts for this. Talk about how you can actually go and get a demo environment for this. So some great ways to actually be able to try this out if you don't already have licenses or you don't have an environment you can test this with. And then we'll open things up for Q&A and give you some additional resources as well. Now, as I mentioned, there are actually 3 sets of SCIM APIs that are out there. Today, we're actually going to be focusing on the far right one out there, which is our privacy APIs. This actually relates to something called subject rights requests, or SRRs. If you've ever dealt with things like GDPR or the California privacy laws, this is very much in that space. Things like the right to be forgotten or the, what data do you have on me? If you're looking for that type of information within your system, basically within inside of M365, there's a great way to be able to actually go and find out, hey, what are those things that are content related to myself, to another user, someone else that you're trying to get that subject rights request on. Now, in terms of just kind of the overall for the API with this, the real goal for this is to be able to help our customers and our partners be able to automate a lot of the things that they do maybe today in the UI or through the compliance portal. When you have to do a lot of these kind of repetitive tasks, or you've got like a bulk operation that you're trying to do for those subject rights requests, that can be very tedious. Would you rather have somebody, spending hours going and doing those, filling out the forms and kicking off the request for this? Or would you rather be able to kind of prepare some type of CSV file or something else to be able to input and then just query it with the API? Lots of ways you can actually get some efficiency and be able to be very productive having that API available to you versus having to actually do this directly through the UI for out there. A couple different things we can share just from a sample use cases for this. Again, you can do things for automation of, there's kind of 2 terms here. There's subject rights requests. There's also data subject requests, or DSRs. Fairly similar just in terms of what the naming for these things are. Just some kind of small difference between them. But DSR is another term we also use for those SRRs out there. You might be trying to automate the creation of those things, and this could be coming from a line of business application, could be coming from an intake form. Maybe you've got something like a Power App or a Power Automate to be able to actually go and kick off those types of requests. We're also seeing a number of third-party vendors who are also going and doing integrations with this. They may have their own system of record, they may have their own tool, their own kind of SaaS service or a website or an app that they're using, but they can actually reach into M365 and be able to automate those types of tasks directly through the APIs out there. So lots of great ways we can be able to go and work with the data. I'll actually turn things over to Cameron to talk to us a little bit about some of the different sample queries that are out there.
All right, thanks, Brian. So basically, one of the primary use cases we have around this is the creation, right, and automating that SRR creation. And so just have here a sample query regarding the post operation being made to create that subject's right request. And so you can see populated with certain information that you would pass in the body of that request in order to create that SRR, and then link to our documentation as well in case you want to learn more about that specific query. And of course, we have documentation for each of these APIs. And then so moving on to the next use case. Next big one's going to be getting that SRR status, right? So you create that SRR, you might have done some other things with this, get some additional information or perform some action, right, related to that subject rights request. And so we have other queries as well to get details about the SRR itself that you're looking to get, say, status information on, as well as an API to get a final report. Once there's additional information that's been added by that privacy administrator and that kind of thing, as well as an ability to both add and list notes, right? So if someone goes in, adds a note to that particular SRR, you can get that information as well, which again we'll be demoing here shortly. And so documentation for that as well. And then from there, I believe we can go ahead and move into the demo. So I will go ahead and share out my screen for this. All right, so you can see here, so this is Postman. And so for anyone who's not familiar with Postman, Postman is a great API testing tool that you can use to basically just craft raw HTTP queries and that kind of thing to test out various REST APIs. And so in this case, we have an official Microsoft graph, essentially collection that you can fork that has these queries kind of pre-crafted, so you're not having to manually create all of these. So in this particular case, under our compliance subfolder here, you can see the subject rights request with our 2 use cases that we were discussing, and we will do some test queries on. And so just a quick note about Postman. So you can see some variables in here as noted by the kind of double curly braces. And so where that would be populated is under your variables at the top of the collection. So you can see that I've kind of got some stuff pre-populated here. And then so let's go ahead and get started. We will go ahead and get a access token. And so in this case, we are using delegated permissions. So we're going to go ahead and basically, populate our application registration information so that we can get that. And so you can see that these are also variables, which I have kind of in my environment set up here at the top. And so with that, we will go ahead and get our access token. And you can see that it automatically went ahead and got me my access token that we're going to use. If you were logging in for the first time, being delegated permissions, you would actually get a prompt, right, to sign in. And then if you hadn't previously consented to the permission or permissions being requested, right, you would see a consent prompt for that as well. But of course, that was done prior to this, which is why you don't see it here. All right, so moving under our subjects rights requests, and specifically we're going to go ahead and move forward with creating that SRR. And so you can see here I've got my post request set up in the URL pattern for the creation of that SRR, and again populated with some information here such as like regulation, the name that you want to use, some information about the data subject of that request, and we will go ahead and send that query. And if everything goes well, we should get a successful response. Takes just a few moments. All right, and we got back a successful response, our HTTP 201 created, and we can see the information returned from the SRR that we just created. You can see there's quite a bit of information there. And then in addition to that, if we go look at our at the portal here, we can do a quick refresh, and I would expect, I believe it should show up by now. Yep. And so here's our SRR that we just created as visible in the subject rights request portal, right? So if you needed to do some manual action outside the API or just needed to go look at it in the portal at a later time, you can see that that SRR is here, and we can see that it's currently in the data estimate progress section. So going back to Postman, another option is to list SRRs that you have available. If you notice from that, the UI, right, we had several SRRs there. And so you can see essentially what this API is doing is enumerating that list of available SRRs, right, which you could use to grab the ID of one of these and feed that into a GET request, which we're actually about to do here in just a moment. So you might be wondering kind of how we're getting that ID for this next request that we're making, that we're seeing a variable for here, and you can actually see it's populated. And so how did we get that? Well, in Postman, this particular query is set up essentially to read the response from that and then save that ID of that SRR we just created into a variable. All right, and so again, moving on to the tracking the status of that SRR. Again, we've populated this variable with the SRR that we just recently created. So we want to get details about that specific SRR, not list out, that full list of the several SRRs that we had created as we saw in the portal. And so you can see here we've got the various stages. So that you can check information about essentially the status of this request, right? And so you kind of saw a little bit about that when we saw the response of the SRR that was just created, but you can also use this get SRR request in order to see, again, the status of that request. Again, like we discussed earlier, there is an option to get a final report. Now, you're not going to see anything for this one. We do get a status okay, but again, it's just kind of like a null response, right? Just because we haven't completed that SRR, we don't have a final report available just yet. Same for get final attachments. Again, these are things that get added by the privacy administrator. You will see an error in this particular one just because, again, we don't have anything associated with this yet, being a brand new request. So we get our 404 not found there. But as I was mentioning, the ability to create and list notes, right? So in this case, we're just going to create a simple note and send that, and we should get back a successful response for that post call. We get our 201 created. And then we can turn around and do a list of notes. So if we had several notes, we can go back and check and see what our notes are. And then jumping back to the portal here, we can take a look at that SRR, and we can look at things such as our notes, like our note that we just created here. Again, and just through the UI, seeing things like the history, status, etc. All right. And Brian, I will go ahead and stop presenting and turn it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cameron, for showing that. Really great to see things not only in the API with Postman, but also then going back to the portal and seeing where that actually shows up. So let's flip back to our slides here. Got a couple things just to wrap up with. One thing to note for this is subject rights requests in kind of the Microsoft Priva space. This does require a separate set of licensing. This is not tied to E1, E3, E5, or the A1, A3, A5 types of SKUs, things like that. Every time you do a subject rights request, it will require the creation of a new one that'll require a new essentially purchase for one of those SRRs. The current pricing for this is $200 US per subject rights request. If you are looking for bulk or volume kind of licensing for this, please do reach out to whoever your licensing expert is, your resellers, things like that. Just note that this is not going to be one of those APIs or the things that's included directly with your existing licensing. There are some additional things for that. So please be aware of that. If you're looking for a way to actually go and try this out, though, we do have a slide for that here in a second, so you can see more on that. Also note that if there are any types of permissions or other things that might be applicable for this, these are using delegated permissions. And as such, if you're trying to view things inside of the portal, if you're trying to get access to different areas, there are a set of Microsoft Priva roles and permissions that can apply for this. Please do take a look at the URL on here. We'll post this into the chat just so you can go and take a look at that. If you're looking for ways to actually go and get a demo environment for this, as we mentioned previously in the community call, there is the Microsoft 365 developer program. With that, you can get that sandbox tenant, 25 E5 licenses, again, self-renews out there. The other area, as we're mentioning for the licensing for this, there is a trial for Microsoft Priva. You can go to aka.ms/try-priva, and you'll get a set amount of those SRRs available to you inside of your tenant. Or you'll get it for a specified amount of time for that. So feel free to take a look at that, again, as another way to try this out before you actually go and purchase things. Great way to be able to test it out there and see if it's going to meet your needs for this. And then the link also to the Postman collection. Cameron did a great job of actually packaging together the different sample queries that we have out there, putting them onto the official Microsoft Graph set of Postman collection out there. You can find more at aka.ms/graphpostman. And we'll leave the slide up here just for a second if you do have any questions. A couple of different links to show you as well. If you want to look more about those privacy APIs, you can find them at aka.ms/priva/API. And also as well for those permissions, here's the URL for that as well. So you can take a look at that, and we'll post these things into the chat window.
But from a timing perspective, I guess we can follow up on the questions in the chat. It's just easier that way.
Yep. We'll follow up in the chat line for ones. All right. Appreciate everyone's time, and have a good rest of your call.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Cameron. Really, really cool stuff.